Today's episode is sponsored by New England Botanic Garden at Tower Hill, a year-round destination less than an hour from Boston. Discover summer at the garden with thousands of blooms, breathtaking exhibits, and twilight experiences. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, the garden stays open late, with events that include beer gardens, live music, sunset views, dinner specials, firefly walks, and more. Here there is something magical for everyone to enjoy. Plan your summer visit today at nebg.org.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
But not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm Associate Editor at Fine Gardening Magazine.
Hi, and I'm Danielle Sherry. I'm the Executive Editor here at FG. And today, Carol, this is an exciting topic. It's plants that take sun and shade, not plants that will do well in sun and then plants that will do well in shade, because that's every single plant, but these plants that will tolerate both ends of the spectrum of conditions related to light, if you will. And what a cool topic, right? Because that's such a useful group of plants.
Absolutely. And I think there are more plants that fit into this category than a lot of people realize. I mean, most plants can take partial shade. There are only, sort of a handful is not the right word, but it's a minority of plants that absolutely must have full sun all day long.
True. And when I was going through my list, it's like, oh, okay, maybe you sacrifice a little bit of color, right? If it's a plant that's super golden, bright yellow in sun, if you move it into a little bit more shade, you're going to get more in the chartreuse angle and maybe a few less blooms or vice versa. I think shade plants are a lot less forgiving to be pushing more into sunny conditions, or at least that's what I was coming across as I was researching.
Yeah, I have one, we'll get into it a little later in the show, but I have one that I think people think of as only shade that really can take quite a lot of sun. So
I love that. And, why do we care? Why do we care about this? Well, everybody seldom has a garden that is all sun or all shade. Usually there's this sliding scale within a bed, even the smallest of beds, that has all sorts of conditions. You've got a larger shrub, you're going to need perennials that would, tolerate some of the shaded conditions underneath in a sunny bed. The other thing that was very valuable for choosing plants for me in this category is that I have a larger landscape, and I'm always trying to follow those landscaper rules and those garden designer rules of repetition. So choosing a few of these plants that will take myriad conditions and grouping them throughout the entire landscape, it helps me avoid the onesie-itis and just looking like a crazy person planted this landscape. It gives me a little bit more cohesiveness to my beds and borders. All right, with that said, lay your first plant on me.
All right. So I decided that I would go for a woody to start, and the one that I picked was Russian Arbor Vitae. That's Microbiota decussata or decussata, and that is hardy from zones 3 to 7. I mean, Russian Arbor Vitae, you've got to figure it's from Siberia or something. Very winter hardy, cold hardy. Doesn't love the deep south is my guess, since the hardiness ranges are geared toward winter hardiness, but when you see something that only goes to zone 7, there's like a great portion of the country that probably can write this one off. But I'm guessing that western zone 7, this is more likely to work out there. I think it's the heat, humidity in the summer that it really doesn't like. This one was suggested by Joanne Vieira in her article about problem-solving ground covers, and I will drop a link to that awesome article in the show notes. But what I thought was cool is that this is bigger than you would usually think of for a ground cover. So it gets only 6 to 18 inches tall, so like not more than 2 feet tall, 10 to 15 feet wide. So it's a spreader. And it likes full sun to partial shade, average to moist, well-drained soil. It's native to southeastern Siberia, and she suggested it for slopes or, covering ground in a sort of a understory situation, right? Because it can take the variety of light conditions. It has this wonderful lacy texture, and the branches are like 5 to 8 feet long, so they sort of layer over each other and cascade over each other. I think we might have had one of these in the test garden.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, yeah. And it is still going strong. I was over there the other day, even though we are no longer working at that test garden. And it is completely untouched by the deer and the rabbits and every other varmint that was hanging around that test garden. Still doing great. It's enormous. I don't imagine anyone is ever going to move it. But it's just like seems like such a useful texture because it looks very different than a lot of the other low growing perennials and shrubs that we would normally see used as ground covers. One thing that Joanne mentioned in her article was that it will bronze a bit in winter, especially if it is in that full sun. So you might even notice if you're growing it in a space where there's, a lot more sun one side than the other, that the sunny side will sort of look rusty and the shady side will look more green in the winter. That'll go away during the summer months, so you don't really need to worry about it too much. But I know there are some folks out there that like a little bronzing drives them crazy. And if that's you, just plant it in more shade and you should be fine. And winter shade, right? So it's like if it's deciduous shade, you're going to get that bronzing in winter. Quite cold tolerant, as I mentioned before, hardy down to zone 3. And Joanne mentioned too that it's not fussy about pH. So it'll go from 5 to 8 pH, sort of in that like middle range, not extremes on either end. It's a bit tricky to get established. You want to make sure that the crown is nice and level with the soil, and you need to keep it watered for the first season. But after that, it is more drought tolerant. So you don't need to give it supplemental water forever and ever. And we certainly did not in the test garden, I can tell you that. And we probably didn't even give it supplemental water the first season. But once it's established, quite an unfussy plant. You just need to be a little careful when you're first getting it started.
I feel like if you're like, I'm a very type A person. I don't hide that. And I feel like if you're the type of gardener though that doesn't like your conifers to bronze out, you probably shouldn't be a gardener. Like, if I don't care, like most people shouldn't care. And it's interesting because the color on that is like, it's almost a purpley copper. I don't know if that makes sense, like that color combo, but it does. And it's really, really beautiful. And the other thing I'll say is, talk about plants that thrive on neglect. This thing looks gorgeous. And it wasn't even in the test garden. It was like outside of the fences of the test garden. Like it was on the outer perimeter. And I was there a couple of months ago, and that thing is beautiful, but I think you'd need a chain and a pickup truck in order to like transplant it at this point because it's so awesome.
Absolutely. They get huge. If you're planting it as a ground cover, you're doing multiples, you want to space them like 4 to 6 feet apart. But don't plant it where you think you might not want it in 10 years because it'll still be there and it will be much, much bigger.
Little on the large side. No, that's a beautiful, beautiful plant. And I'm cracking up because you start with a woody and I'm going to start with a perennial. And so I just think any hardy geranium is a great choice for plants that take sun and shade. I've got Roseanne, I've got Byakovo. Everybody knows Roseanne. She's, kind of a bright pink and kind of a sprawling, effect to her. Byakovo is a little more condensed, but I'm not going to talk about either one of those. I'm going to talk about Carmina hardy geranium, which is Geranium cantabrigiense Carmina. It's zones 5 to 8. We've had people write in and say, hey, I'm in zone 4. This does fine for me. So I feel like in a little bit more of a protected area of zone 4, you can also get away with Carmina. It's one of the toughest of the perennial geraniums, but I don't think we have to tell our listeners, but this is not, these aren't window box geraniums. These are, small, mounding, tufted perennials that get to be about 8 to 10 inches tall and then up to about 1.5 feet wide. They really do make this pillowy kind of cloud of foliage. Somebody was like, oh, they're palmate leaves, but they're so tiny that they almost look like mini lily pads. That's kind of the effect that they have. And Carmina has a little bit of like a velveteen cover on the outside of her leaves. And just really, really beautiful, bright Kelly green. And then you'll get in generally mid to late May here in New England, these wiry stems that cover the plant with these gorgeous, simple magenta, pink, purple flowers and kind of these really beautiful red stamens that come out of them. The flowers are small, I would say they're probably nickel sized, but there's tons of them that cover the plant. And this puppy will keep blooming for you into summer. Once things get super hot, it generally stops flowering. I like to, if I'm feeling feisty, go in at that point and give it a little bit of a shear just to take off those flower stems. It's super easy. You can do it with head shears and just basically go whack. And then in fall, you can get a second bloom, another, flush of blooms. It's not as intense as the spring, summer bloom, but it's nice to get that second rush. The other thing about this particular hardy geranium and some of the other Geranium cantabrigiense is that they flush a magenta color in the fall. You get genuinely cool fall color off of this perennial, this spreading perennial, which is super, super cool. What else do I have to say about it? Oh, okay. We talk about plants that, get a lot of bang for their buck. You start off with one clump of this plant. I actually think the original I bought was a 4-inch pot that I found. And over the course of a couple years only, it will have reached its maximum maturity. And it has these side roots that almost look stolon-like, but are super easy to lift and cut with your pruners, which I know you're not supposed to do, but that's what I do, into the soil, cut that out. And you can plug this plant in all sorts of different places. Full sun, it gets a little bigger. You have a more prolific bloom. Full shade, a little less blooming, but still a really prolific plant. Doesn't put on as much of a spread in a full shade situation, but everywhere in between. And this is such a great little knitter plant. This is going to go into all the little spaces and the nooks and the crannies, but it's not aggressive. So this isn't going to reseed all over the place. As a matter of fact, it's a sterile hybrid. So it's, Geranium X cantabrigienses. So it is a sterile hybrid and won't reseed. But don't worry, you'll get babies because all you got to do is, shove your pruners into the dirt and start cutting away. So yeah, that I would say any hardy geranium, but I'm a big fan of both Carmina and Byakovo. Byakovo's white, so if you're not into the pinks, go for that one. But if you like a bright pink, go for Carmina. All right, Carol, is it Freaky Friday? Are you going to do all woody plants and I'm going to do all perennial plants?
No. In fact, I have a tropical plant for us next. So that's sort of...
Shut the front door. What? Come on now.
I know. And
right.
We don't usually get to do tropical plants, but there was nothing in the title that said, hardy plants for sun and shade.
Oh, she's looking at the fine print of the contract.
Absolutely.
All right, give it to me.
Okay. So I'm going to go with Pretoria canna. That's Canna indica Pretoria. That's zones 8 to 11. It is a perennial in those zones. So obviously this is not one that's adaptable to cold climates, but it is quite adaptable to sun and shade. So this is an interesting...
A canna? What?
A canna, absolutely. And all cannas, in fact. And I was telling you the other day about how I was killing multiple birds with one stone because I did an interview with Irvin Etienne, which those of you that listen every week, that was the last episode. And then I pitched an article outline that we're going to be doing his home garden in the coming year. We're going to photograph, it'll be in 2025 issue. And then also when I was talking to him about his garden and all the very many tropical plants he likes, he mentioned that cannas are great in both sun and shade. And I thought, oh, okay, there's another bird with the same stone. We're going to do a canna. So this is one of Irvin's favorites. It's one of many people's favorites. It is so distinctive looking. And I learned did a little research about it, and I learned something really freaky. You want to talk about Freaky Friday? This is a cultivar. It originated from radiation experiments in the 1950s in India's Agri-Horticultural Society. So they took Canna, Wyoming. Canna, Wyoming is a sort of, it has like burgundy bronze leaves and orange flowers. Okay. They blasted this poor defenseless thing with radiation in some form. And this striped genetic sport, was an offspring. And
this sounds like fake news.
Maybe it has superpowers, right? Like what? I know. Right. It's just so it originated in the 50s through this weird like nuclear age experimentation, and it was called Bengal tiger. Okay, and then it sort of disappeared for a little while, and someone brought it to South Africa and quote unquote rediscovered it and introduced it as Pretoria. And so that's how it has the name Pretoria, but there are still people out there that say Bengal tiger is the real name. It was not necessary to rename it. It's the same cultivar, but you may see it sold as Bengal tiger, but everywhere I was seeing this, it was called Pretoria.
Wow.
Yeah. Weird, right? Just so weird. I love the stuff we find out for this
There
show.
There is very few times when I am speechless. I am speechless.
So, like most cannas, it's a big one. It grows up to 6 feet tall, maybe more like 3 feet wide. It's more narrow, tall, upright. Those gorgeous big leaves, and the leaves are striped with bright green and yellow. And so that striping is probably why they gave it the Bengal tiger name. And you can spot this one. Nothing else looks quite like it. It loves full sun. All cannas love full sun, but you can also grow them in pretty much full shade. And the advantage of growing them in shade is that their leaves tend to look good for longer. So this one has a sort of a tendency, as the leaves age, they'll get a little more dull. If you have a lot of sun, they may get a little crispy around the edges, and especially if you get dry weather, they can really start to look pretty bad in full sun. So the secret is, give them a little shade or keep the soil moist, and that'll keep the foliage looking good for longer. But it can, on the other end of the soil moisture spectrum, it can grow in standing water. You could put this, in a water garden, and it would grow just fine. It likes fertile soil, doesn't necessarily need fertile soil, but it likes it, and it'll be happy for any extra water you give it, especially if you got it in a container and it's only getting rainfall. You might want to consider watering it on a regular basis, just because it'll get bigger and better and just look more to its full potential. So there we go.
What do the flowers look like? And are you a flower cutter of cannas, or are you a flower do your thing canna owner?
I love the flowers, and the hummingbirds love the flowers too. So this one, like its parent, Wyoming, it has orange flowers. But you don't necessarily really even need them. They're great. They're a bonus. But this is a plant that looks good the whole season long, whether it's in bloom or not. And the photo that I dropped into the show notes, that was in Irvin's original city garden in Indianapolis. And that one was growing in partial shade, under the shade of some enormous banana plants.
His garden, I'm so excited to see like his new iteration of his country garden in 2025. But that is so cool. And I will say, Carol convinced me. Well, no, Carol forced me into growing cannas last year, because she showed up to a rendezvous with a flat of canna. I guess are they corms or bulbs?
I think they're tubers.
Tubers. All right. A flat of canna tubers. And she was like, here you go. So I did. I planted them. I loved the bold texture. I mean, there is no other as far as bold texture is concerned. And they're not that hard. Like, I waited until the frost hit the leaves. I chopped the leaves off. I lifted those tubers up. I threw them in with some sawdust, the pet bedding that you said, in a Tupperware container. Now, I'm saying all of this, and I'm probably going to go into the Tupperware container, and they're probably all going to be, rotten or something like that. But I have high hopes that this was one of the easiest overwintering projects I had, and I followed Carol's instructions to a T. So fingers crossed when I go in there in a couple of weeks to replant that they're still viable.
I'm very confident. They're super easy. One of the easiest to overwinter of all the tropical plants. So
right.
I am certain you've got some viable tubers still left in there. Unless the mice got in there.
No, Tupperware. They were in Rubbermaid containers. So,
Perfect.
Unless they, my mice got shot up with radiation and they chewed a hole through it, we should be fine. All right, so I'm going to talk about another perennial that should not be hardy for my garden, but is. So I'm really questioning the research that said that this is a solid 7B plant, because I don't buy that. It's a plant with very many common names. And you'll also see, like, throughout the Fine Gardening website, it's been given a couple of different common names. But I'm going to go with spotted widow's tears, and it's a Tenentia pringlei, which is zones, and I'm going to say 6B, not 7B, but probably 6A to 11. This is so cool. It looks like a spiderwort. It looks like a Tradescantia. It really, really does. And it was a plant that I spotted so many years ago. Y'all, I just figured out that I've been with Fine Gardening 18 years coming up in a couple of weeks. So this was one of the first photo shoots I think I ever participated in. And I was down in Tennessee in the garden of Robin Brown. And she just had this really cool garden just outside Nashville, and a garden that definitely went from full sun into full shade. And she did an article that was all on dry shade. So we were concentrated in the back. And this spotted widow's tears was one of these cohesive plants that I saw groupings of it throughout her whole landscape, from the front garden all the way to the back garden. And I became obsessed with this thing. And she came out and she saw that I was like down on the ground and I was taking all these photos. And I was like, what is this cool thing? Well, the next thing I knew, she had lifted up a piece of it, because it was very easy. It's almost like rhizomatic, that it creates this kind of rooty mass. She lifts up, yanks out a piece, throws it in a plastic shopping bag, and she's like, here you go. And I don't even remember what she told me it was at the time, but she's like, this thing grows like a weed. I'm like, all right, this is cool. So I brought it back. I planted it in my Connecticut garden, which at the time was a zone 5 garden, has since moved into zone 6 in its re-establishment from the USDA. But it did great. And over the years, serendipitously, it has self-seeded itself in little areas and pockets, sometimes with my doing of transplanting little seedlings here and there from my Hospital Hill in full sun, lean soil, terrible conditions, all the way to this tiny little nook of a north-facing garden that I have in the back of my house, which is full shade all day long. It's not obnoxious. I feel like people hear serendipitous, self-seeding, and they go, no way, that sounds like a thug. Not at all. It's one of those self-seeders that you're just so excited about when you see it. And the reason being is it's got the coolest gray-green, almost, I guess, teardrop-shaped leaves that have plum purple spots all over them. And then the underside of the leaf is dark purple as well. And just as a foliage plant, which gets to be about, 8 to 10 inches tall, and then kind of billowy into a mound that's around a foot wide, it's just so cool. It's just a really, really cool texture, really interesting. Just a nice kind of dark plum, dark gray green that really offsets some lighter colors in the garden. It looks really, really great with gray foliage. So, near my catmints, just looks spectacular. And then in summer for us, late summer, after it's matured enough, it gets these clear blue amethyst flowers that look very much like spiderwort, if you're familiar with that plant, with a slight yellow center to them and just absolute perfection. And they get absolutely covered in these flowers. I love it too because it is one of the longest blooming all the way into frost, when the frost completely knocks it back. It keeps blooming, and the pollinators look like they're having like an, New Year's Eve party, because it's the last thing that they're really getting to, drink the nectar and get the pollen from. It's a great, great plant. It is actually native to Mexico and into portions of the southwestern U.S. So clearly not anywhere close to where I live. But I really do genuinely love this plant, and I feel like it's just another bang for your buck plant. A plant that you could get one or two of, and then over the course of a couple of years end up having seedlings or transplanting and pulling pieces off of it to plot into different areas of your garden. It's got a terrible common name, spotted widow's tears, but it's really cool. Carol, do you grow any spiderwort or tradescantias at all?
I do not. I have had it as a house plant, I believe. Are there some tropical ones that are house plants?
There are some tropical ones that are house plants too. And I feel like a couple years ago, Sweet Kate, that had truly brilliant gold foliage and purple flowers, was super popular. It was like in every garden we saw and featured for a while. But this spotted widow's tears is a little more subdued than that beauty.
that was a cool one, and we had a coworker whose wife's name is Kate who bought that at the long ago plant sale that Fine Gardening used to do.
Good call. All right, so we've had a tropical and a woody. Are you going to give me a perennial this episode or no?
This is a perennial.
All right.
This is a perennial that a lot of people think of as just shade. And I'm going to go for Sum and Substance Hosta. Hosta Sum and Substance, zones 3 to 9.
Nope, I'm not buying it. You're going to have to sell me on this one.
All right, I'm going to sell you on this one. Now, because hostas grow so well in shade, I think a lot of people think of them as something that can't take any sun, but that is not true. And I have seen hostas, especially the big ones with corrugated leaves or like waxy coating on their leaves, growing in full sun in a lot of gardens over the years that I have photographed. And I have had gardeners tell me, don't be afraid to put a hosta in full sun. It may look a little bad by the end of the season. We have to admit that. In fall, and especially if it's in sort of like an area with deciduous trees, when the leaves start to come down, it really is getting full sun all day long. It may start to burn. But that is only part of the season. And the upside of growing these big hostas with more sun is they will get even bigger and more vigorous. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So, sum and substance generally accepted as a cultivar that you can plant in complete full sun. And it's huge. It gets about 3 feet tall, 5 feet wide, or more. Could be 6 feet wide if it's happy and it has some time to get to bulk up. The one thing you can do to encourage it to bulk up is give it good fertile soil and plenty of moisture. And especially if it's in full sun, that moisture is important. Hostas are really survivors, and if they are too dry or if they're getting too much heat, they'll just go dormant. You'll see them again the next year, but if you want the full effect, keep it watered. The leaf color varies depending on how much sun it gets, so it goes from light green in more shade to chartreuse in partial shade to gold if you have it in full sun. And it really prefers, the sweet spot for it is between a quarter day and 3/4 day of sun. So if you can get it just a little bit of afternoon shade, it'll be as happy as can be. Mid to late summer flowers, they're those typical lavender bells on scapes that get 4 feet tall. And I mean, I usually do not recommend hostas because of my deer situation. And so if you can keep the deer away, this is an excellent, dramatic, beautiful plant. You can scatter it across the landscape and see the different colors that it'll give you in the different light conditions, but it is a super good one to experiment with. And Chen Chu, who was an author I worked with in Ontario, he said, give these big hostas more sun, you will not be disappointed. And so I haven't done it myself. I have started with the deer spray on the few hostas I have in my landscape. If I can get them through this season, I think that I will, maybe try one of these big ones in the future. And if I do try it, I'm going to give it a little more sun.
That is so interesting because I had an Empress Wu that is a couple of years old and happens to be in a bit more sun. And the reason being is I had it in as an understory plant to a larger tree that I limbed up. So then it started, getting a little bit more sun. And the first couple of years in full shade, put on some decent growth. The last 2 years that I've seen, it's a monster. Now that could just be its, maturing process, but I wonder if it's because it was more sun.
It might be. Yeah, it might be. And I think a lot of people discover this kind of by accident when a tree comes down. And then their hostas get enormous. And they say, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen.
I mean, bonus of the tree coming down, I guess. Well, I'm going to hop on that bandwagon because I think that most people think of Japanese forest grass as a partial to full shade perennial. And, occasionally you'll see it pushed into a little bit more sun. I think most of the time you see Aureola that is in that full sun situation, which... all right, I've seen that plant 8 bazillion times, so I'm okay with that. But I'm going to feature all gold, which I feel like you can really see a distinction between when you plant all gold Japanese forest grass, and this is Hyconocloa macra, all gold. When you plant it in full sun versus full shade, there is a very appreciable difference in the foliage color. So in shade, you get kind of a chartreuse, a limey green, a little bit of a hint of yellow undertone to it. If you plant this plant in full sun, which it will do well with a decent amount of moisture. I mean, we're not talking, it doesn't need to be, even moisture consistently, but you can't put this in a droughty situation. But in a full sun scenario, it is gold. It is shock your eyeballs gold. And just I haven't noticed any, size differentiation. It seems to get the same size in both locations. That's generally about a foot tall, a little bit shorter, maybe 10 to 12 inches tall, and about as wide as well. Japanese forest grass, if you don't know them, you should. It's very, very cool and versatile perennial, but has this almost bamboo-like cascading blades that are just beautiful. It looks like a waterfall, or, a less generous description might be like the most insane toupee you've ever seen in your life, and just, plopped on the ground. And just absolutely beautiful, especially on garden edges, or cascading over a stone wall, or, softening the edge of a pathway. Well behaved, does start to increase in size slowly. This is a theme, another bang for your buck plant, because after a few years, it really does take quite well to division. I recommend doing it in the early spring. And usually, like within a couple of years of having this plant, 2 to 3 years, it's viable enough for division and is beefed up enough for division. So durable, just such a really durable plant. And I have failed with other cultivars of Japanese forest grass. Oh my gosh, I feel like I spent like $1 bazillion on both Naomi and Nicholas. Don't tell my husband. A lot of money because when those two varieties came out, I thought, oh my gosh, I have to have these, and did not do well for me. And I am normally not a babyer, but I did baby those because they were so pricey, and didn't make it. I think, limped along for about 2 seasons, and then by season 3, it was just, the most pitiful one blade of grass coming out of the clump. But all gold, try to kill it, weed whack it. Tell me how it works out, because I'm sure it would be okay, because it's very, very tough as far as a cultivar is concerned. Tough, lean soils, too. I already mentioned that, being in a droughty condition constantly is probably not its best jam, but in these lean soils, which I have around my property and in a lot of my beds, it seems to do just fine. And if I start to see it, limping along, because we've gone 5 weeks without any appreciable rain, I go out there with a bucket and I just dump it on it. And generally that's enough to get it to make it through. I think I misspoke on its height. It can max out at 14 inches. I said only 12. I'm reading my research now, and 14 inches is, it can get up to that. And then eventually, if you're grouping these together, you can get almost this mini hedge-like effect, or these really, really beautiful cohesive mounds that all kind of integrate together and are so, so beautiful. And then in fall, ornamental grass, it puts up these really cute little, feather-like tufts that are golden. They're not the craziest thing in the world, but they're really cool. They add a nice texture to the fall garden. And now that I'm thinking of it, you're gonna see a photo in the show notes of this plant in front of my Empress Wu hosta. And I did not plan that, I swear to God. I had no idea Carol was doing a hosta and we were going to talk about it, but you can kind of see that pairing in that matchup. So, I think if you're looking for very, very amazing movement in your garden, go with a Japanese forest grass, and I can't recommend all gold as a cultivar enough. All right, Carol, we're down to the nitty gritty, the last plant of our plants that take both sun and shade. And what do you got for me?
Well, I realized I was looking at the first 3 plants that I had picked for this episode, and I had 3 plants that are really all about the foliage. So I thought maybe I should throw one in that has some flower appeal. So I picked fragrant abelia. It's got 2 names. It's Abelia mosinensis, or Zabelia with a Z, Zabelia taehionii.
Oh, come on. It's these PhD students. They're doing all this DNA testing. They're like, no, Abelia isn't Abelia anymore. Oh, no. All right, Abelia. We're going with that.
Yes. And it's weird that the new name rhymes. Yeah,
Zabelia.
Zabelia.
Yeah, it's like Amelia Bedelia. Yeah, no, come on. Here we go.
So this is a shrub. It grows in full sun to partial shade, average to moist, acidic, well-drained soil is its preference. This is a kind of out of the ordinary shrub. You don't see it very often. It's native to North and South Korea. And it gets about 5 to 6 feet tall and wide. It's got like a rounded habit with graceful arched branches. And as you can guess from its common name, it has fragrant flowers. It's known for its fragrance. So it blooms for a period of about 2 weeks in mid-spring, and it will depend where you are when that happens. And it starts with pink buds in terminal clusters that open out into these beautiful tube-shaped pinkish white flowers. And when it's in bloom, you can smell this from the other side of the garden. And different people describe the scent differently, but some people say it smells like jasmine. Some people say it smells like Daphne. Some describe the scent as being spicy. But no matter what you call it, most people find the scent appealing, and it's very persistent. And, it's like sort of the main reason to grow this plant. The flowering will be best in full sun, but it will take quite a lot of dappled shade, or not full shade, but partial shade. And it has this beautiful spear-shaped foliage and leaf-like bracts that will get reddish orange in autumn. And the more sun you have, the better that fall color will be. It doesn't perform especially well in the deep south. This is another one where the heat and the humidity are a problem. But there is now a cultivar that is very cold hardy. So Sweet Emotion, which is SMNAMDS, is its cultivar name. Okay. But you'll find it sold as Sweet Emotion Abelia. That can go down to zone 4. Wow. That's unusually cold hardy for an abelia of any kind. So if you're up there in the cold frozen north, there's finally an abelia for you. But I haven't grown this, I must admit, but this is one, if you see it when it's in bloom, you will not forget it, just because that scent is so amazing.
And some incredible fall foliage, fall color too. So yeah, that's as to take Irvin's phrase, that's a plant that earns its keep.
That's right, yeah.
It really does. All right, so my last plant, I think I did all perennials. This is a first. I'm going to go with Ito peonies. And I was delighted to learn several years ago that Ito peonies do well in partial, borderline almost full sun. And I think that's the tree peony genetics in them. Herbaceous peonies, for the most part, kind of struggle in a shady situation. They really need that full sun to put on a bloom show. But tree peonies tend to, be from regions in Asia that are a little bit more shady. They tend to do better. So Ito peonies, which are kind of a cross of both of those, they're an intergenetic cross between herbaceous and tree peonies. They do well in some shade, which is really kind of nice because they look and react like a small shrub. So I think it kind of counts as a shrub as far as my world is concerned. I've got a few different varieties. I decided to just go with Cora Louise because that's the newest addition to my garden. And the reason I did that, admittedly, I walked through my garden trying to get ready for the show and looking at, all right, what's doing well in the sun and shade. And the new spring foliage, which you will see a photo of in our show notes, and in case anybody needs some navigation directions again, go to finegardening.com. We've got a podcast tab right on the top of the screen. Click that and you'll see all the plant lists and photos for everything we talk about today. And included there is the spring foliage of Cora Louise, which is a bright, almost the color of my sweater, burgundy color, and it's so fern-like when it first comes out. It almost looks like a sea creature. It just starts unfurling, and it's really, really beautiful. And it's so not indicative of where it ends up when it actually reaches full maturity, which are these deeply, deeply dissected green, dark green leaves that form 3 feet tall but 3 feet wide, a really nice mounded shrub-like appearance. And then it's an eye-toe peony. So it's got this gorgeous, Cora Louise is a double, light pink petaled, lightly fragranced blossom with a dark pink eye and a boss of, kind of these golden stamens right at the center. So it really does look like an eyeball looking at you. It's beautiful. And eye-toe peonies are zones 4B, 5 to zone 9. I think some of the breeders are very generous in their how low can you go with eye-toe peonies, but say firmly zone 5. And I love them, and they really do look really good in full sun. They'll do well with full sun. They should be watered to get established, especially because they're kind of pricey, so you don't want to screw this up. Get them established, but then they will do well without being on irrigation, which is pretty nice. We've talked about this a million times. I've got a really well-drained, not humus-rich soil, and my eye-toe peonies have never struggled, never burned out on the tips. So moving those also into a little bit of partial shade is going to do them some good as well, because they do just as well and bloom just as strong into partial shade as well. I really like this particular variety as well, just because I'm not a pink person per se. So in a lot of sun, the blossom color almost bleaches out to more of like a white with a burgundy center to it. And I think it's a little bit easier as far as I'm concerned in my color palette of my garden. It's easier to work in with other things. You'll also notice that it's a great plant for integrating into masses. I have a mass of carex, and you'll see the pictures that I've taken is that of this eye-toe peony Cora Louise. I just chunked out the middle of the carex and I plopped it right in the middle, and it looks great, and it covers up this deciduous perennial. I also love eye-toe peonies because you do not have to stake them. They are very, very strong stemmed. They take on that tree peony effect, but without as heavy a blossom. So I think that they even need less staking than a tree peony does, and certainly less than an herbaceous peony, which always need to be staked. So yeah, eye-toe peonies, who knew? Sun and shade, do well. Just save up your pennies, because they're pricey little suckers. And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter to talk about black and white cookies. All right, this is it. Peter, this is too much. This is just too much.
I feel that one of the most underrated baked goods in history is the humble black and white cookie. It has long been overlooked as the truly wonderful confection it is. Let me tell you why. It's a cookie that almost everyone seems universally neutral towards. Well, how is that a selling point, you might be asking yourself? Well, in a world as divided as ours, finding something, anything, that no one either hates or loves is rare and oddly soothing. How on earth does this relate to today's podcast episode, Peter? I'm sure you're musing while driving, gardening, or cooking. I think of these plants that Carol and Danielle have just been discussing as the black and white cookies of the plant world. These plants that, like both sun and shade, are not as flashy as, say, a baked Alaska, or as much of an acquired taste as, say, lavender biscuits. But that's the point. They are appropriate choices for the masses. They cover a lot of ground and ensure that the garden, or picnic, goes off without a hitch. Now, is anyone going to write home about a cookie that looks like an Othello piece and is similarly flavoured? No. But it will satisfy an after-dinner sweet tooth without making much of a fuss. I may have stretched this comparison a little too far, but I can't help but point out that these particular cookies have one half that is covered in bright white frosting and one half that is smothered in dark brooding chocolate. One might even say the black and white cookie has a sunny side and a shady side, but now I'm definitely stretching it. For now, that's all I have on the topic of plants that like sun and shade. I'm off to the nursery to grab some of that Carmina geranium, and then the local bakery to grab some raspberry rugelach. What, did you think I was going to say black and white cookies? Nah, no one likes those very much.
Well, Carol, somehow he made baked goods an appropriate topic for an episode on sun and shade. I just don't really know how he does it, but I was entertained.
He's an entertaining guy, and who doesn't love a good cookie, even if it is completely an irrelevant cookie?
Very true, very true. Well, I'll tell you what, Amy Galloway is our expert testimony, and she did not talk about a single confection or baked good in her expert testimony, but she did talk about some cool plants. So let's see what she has to say.
My name is Amy, and I am the lead horticulturalist in the family garden at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center here in Austin, Texas. My first choice for my favorite plants that can grow in sun or shade is twistleaf yucca, Yucca rupicola. This twistleaf yucca is a really wonderful addition to any sunny or shady part of your garden. It does really well in shady, dry areas, kind of like a shady rock garden, which can be a difficult space to fill, but twistleaf yucca will also do well in other spaces of your garden. It is a really easy, low-maintenance plant that brings evergreen structure to seasons where other plants may be cut down, where perennials may be dormant. It will still be there, evergreen, looking wonderful. It begins with the leaves growing a little bit more straight, and then with age, they begin to twist, which is really beautiful and makes it a nice accent plant as well. In late spring, it begins to bloom, and the bloom is quite showy. The bloom stalk is up to 6 feet tall, and it has these very beautiful, large, white bell-shaped flowers. The petals can be up to 2.5 inches long. And they're very elegant looking. They hang upside down on that bloom stalk, and it's really beautiful. They also attract night blooming moths to the flowers, as well as many other pollinators that visit your garden. Twistleaf yucca in general is a very low maintenance, easy plant in the garden that does bring that structure to maybe the winter season, and it has really beautiful blooms. My second choice is Plateau Goldeneye. Plateau Goldeneye in bloom is quite a sight to see. It is absolutely covered in these very small, the flowers are under 2 inches. They look like little tiny yellow sunflowers that just carpet the plant. It is said to get only 3 feet tall in full sun and up to 6 feet tall in full shade. But my newest planting that I have in full shade is about 4.5 to 5 feet. And that's a really nice size because it's right below eye level and bringing those very cheery yellow blooms right up for you to see. It is a very drought tolerant plant, which is a wonderful thing to have anywhere that you live, but Central Texas in particular, very important. And I love to leave the flowers after they have bloomed on their stalks. I leave it all dried so that once it's producing seed, it's providing seed for the grain eating birds, which is an added benefit to the garden as well. My final choice is the Turk's Cap. The most common name that you'll hear is Turk's Cap, but I really love the common name Sleeping Hibiscus because I feel like it really perfectly describes the flower. The flowers are a really bright, magnetic red color, and the petals, even in full bloom, the petals are kind of overlapping, twisted tightly together around the staminal column that protrudes out of the top of the flower. And it looks like a hibiscus because it is The Turk's cap is also in the mallow family, like hibiscus is, so they are relatives. And the leaves are really nice, deep green, and they're large, palmately shaped leaves that give a really nice tropical feel wherever you have it in the garden. But particularly in those shady areas, it brings a lot of really nice, gorgeous color to those shady areas. Turk's cap also has a little tiny fruit that is like a little teeny tiny apple. It's the texture of an apple. It doesn't taste too much like an apple, but it is edible to humans. But birds and mammals enjoy eating it, as well as the flowers are visited often by hummingbirds. So it's a really gorgeous plant that's really easy, very tough, and brings that wildlife benefit to shady or sunny areas alike.
Oh my gosh, Carol, a yucca that takes sun and shade. A yucca, like in my mind, is a cactus. Like it needs sun. What in shade? It does well in shade?
You know, so I guess yuccas are maybe like the southwest version of hostas.
Mind blown. Mind blown.
That and the radioactive hosta, or the radioactive canna, those are the two weird things.
I mean, the weirdest of episodes, but it was fun. Thanks, Carol. See you next time.